Welcome, friends, to another exciting episode of A VGM Journey. And I'm your host, The Messenger. The track that we're playing into today's show is Title Theme from the game Game & Watch Gallery 4. And it was composed by Riyou, Kinugasa, and Kengo Hagiwara. I got a really fun show for you guys today, and even though I'm excited, I'm also a little sad that this is going to be the final episode of our Game & Watch Gallery series focus. But we're definitely going out on a high, because this is actually my favorite game in the series, and that this is also the only game that came out for the Game Boy Advance and also has multiplayer. And though this is the biggest game in the entire series, where there are 11 Game & Watch games that were remade, however, only 5 of them are brand new for Game & Watch Gallery 4, while the other 6 are games that were on the previous Game & Watch Gallery series, which I will rattle those off real fast. From Game & Watch Gallery 1, Fire and Octopus came back. Game & Watch Gallery 2 was Chef and Donkey Kong. And then Game & Watch Gallery 3 was Mario Bros. And Donkey Kong Jr. I won't be covering those tracks, but I will focus on the stuff that is brand new for Game & Watch Gallery 4. So there's still a lot of really good stuff. And I say let's kick things off with Rain Shower from Game & Watch Gallery 4. That track that you just heard, that was Rain Shower from Game & Watch Gallery 4. The original version of Rain Shower is a pretty cool game where you play as this guy who, during a rain shower, has to keep his clothes dry, and that he goes up and down to move the clothes on a clothesline and to avoid the raindrops that are falling from the sky. And for the modern version of Rain Shower, you play as Mario, who has to keep his friends from getting hit by colored water balloons by Bowser, and that he has to move them back and forth on the clothesline. It starts off with only having Toad and Donkey Kong Jr., but more of his friends show up, and you have to juggle the positions of the various characters to make sure that they don't get hit by the water balloons. And for every 100 points that you score, the season changes, which is really cool. And that you'll notice as you're playing the games on Game & Watch Gallery 4 that they kind of take advantage of the new hardware a little bit. Nothing super crazy, but I think it's cool. And I can't forget about the music, too. I actually really like this song for Rain Shower. And if you've been listening to the previous few episodes, you could definitely tell that it sounds quite a bit different but it's still somehow very fitting for Game and Watch Gallery. So I definitely really like that. We're going to move on to our next track, and that is Boxing from Game and Watch Gallery 4. That track that you just heard, that was Boxing from Game & Watch Gallery 4. Both the classic version and the modern version of Boxing are not very different gameplay wise, and that you have an energy bar and you're boxing against the other opponent, and when you whittle that down, they get knocked back or you get knocked back, and then you just keep going until they get knocked down. And with the modern version, you are playing as Luigi, who has to fight a Wiggler, a Big Boo, and then eventually Waluigi, which I actually thought that was cool. And this was also one of two games on Game & Watch Gallery 4 where you and a friend with a link cable could play two-player on that. Now, that is something that I've never got to try, but I'm sure that it's pretty fun. And the song, I find it very fitting. I definitely get that cavalcade of sports vibe from it, which definitely makes sense since boxing is a sport. And that is so funny watching Luigi just beat the crap out of people while listening to this track. So I think it's a good one. We are going to move on to our next track, and that is Mario's Cement Factory. And once again, it is from Game & Watch Gallery 4. That track that we just heard, that was Mario's Cement Factory from Game & Watch Gallery 4. Mario's Cement Factory is a frantic little game where you play as Mario, who works in a cement factory, and he has to go up and down these elevator platforms to guide the cement down and get them to these trucks that are on the left and right sides of the screen. And that the cement fills up these containers that Mario has to manually go to and flip the switch to let them drop. And they can only hold 3, I would call them blocks, just going with the simple Game & Watch graphics. And that you'll get a miss if it fills up more than 3 blocks. So you have to manage all the containers while making sure that you don't fall down the elevator. And the games typically start off pretty slow, but after a while, things start to really pick up and you're scrambling back and forth between all these containers. And for the modern version, it's pretty much the same concept, except instead of it being a cement factory, it is a cookie factory. And that once in a while, a boo might pop up and actually make its way into one of the containers, and that you just have to get him out because all he's really doing is taking up space and not helping you out. And the track for this, I definitely get that whole frantic day at work kind of vibe from it. And it definitely keeps me on my toes too. And I think overall, I think this is actually one of the better games on Game & Watch Gallery 4. I don't know, I like it quite a bit. We're going to move on to our next track, and that is Donkey Kong 3. And I'm sure that you guys know this, but this is from Game & Watch Gallery 4. That track that you just heard, that was Donkey Kong 3 from Game & Watch Gallery 4. Donkey Kong 3 is the other game on Game & Watch Gallery 4 where you're able to play multiplayer, and that the classic version and the modern version, the gameplay is very similar where you have to shoot things back and forth between you and Donkey Kong. But the difference is that in the classic version, you play as Stanley the Bugman, who has to spray these bugs that are coming towards them and push them towards Donkey Kong, who's also spraying the bugs towards you. And that you have a top row, a middle row, and a bottom row, and you have to go up and down. But you can't just rapidly fire the sprays at the bugs. So you have 3 shots that you can shoot, but then you have to refill your spray, and it can be pretty hectic. And for the modern version, you play as Mario, who's in a haunted house, and that instead of bug spray, you are shooting bubbles, and instead of bugs that are coming at you, you have a fireball and a boo. And that the fireball stays in place, but the boo, whoever he is closest to, if you have your back facing him, then he will try to sneak up on you. And the track itself, even though I do like it, I feel like it doesn't totally fit the game that well. And I just feel like the tempo could be a lot faster sounding, or at least go with like a bit of a different sound. I'm not sure on that. Though I will say that it's still a good track. And we're going to move on to our final game that we're going to cover, and that is Fire Attack. And once again, it is from Game & Watch Gallery 4. That track that you just listened to, that was Fire Attack from Game & Watch Gallery 4. In the classic version of Fire Attack, you play as a cowboy who has to defend his fort from attackers who are desperately trying to burn it down. And in the original version of Fire Attack, the attackers are supposed to represent Native Americans and that they had feathers on their heads. But in Game & Watch Gallery 4, those were removed due to racial stereotypes. And that now I think that they're probably just supposed to be bandits. And in the modern version, you play as Wario, who has to defend a giant gold statue of himself from bombs and bullet bills, and he just has to smack him with a hammer. And the thing that I find really cool about this game is that it starts off just being a giant wall, and when you take your first hit, the wall gets damaged and that there are holes all around it. Then, when you take a second hit, the wall completely comes down and it's just exposing the giant gold statue of Wario. And then if you get hit just one more time, the whole thing crumbles down. Definitely a nice visual element to the game, which I really appreciate that. And the music is weirdly chill, but kind of frantic at the same time. Like, I don't know, it just has a weird balance that I don't really hear too often. And the game itself is a lot of fun too, so definitely one worth checking out. And that's gonna just about do it for the show. And also this entire mini series, which I want to thank all of you guys for checking this out and following along. And I've been getting a lot of good feedback on it. And I think this might be a concept that I want to revisit again in the future. Maybe do another mini series, focus on some random series. And that I promise for the next episode of the show, we will go back to a normal episode. So I definitely have some good stuff waiting for you guys. And if you've been liking the show, have your friends check it out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, maybe, YouTube, whatever podcasting service that you can think of. I'm more than likely going to be on there. You can email the show at vgmjourney@yahoo.com. And you could also check us out on both X and Blue Sky at VGM Journey. We also have a Discord server for the show, which I'll provide a link for that in the show notes, where you could hang out with your fellow VGM Journeymen and talk about games, music, and even look at some cool art. I'm also going to play things out with one more track, and I think it's very fitting that we go out with the credits theme from Game & Watch Gallery 4. And once again, that was composed by Riyou, Kinugasa, and Kengo Hagiwara. Have a good one, everyone.